Kia ora, Grace City. As many of you will have heard by now, I guess, I've just been recently diagnosed with bowel cancer. Sobering news, obviously, and it's still really early days for us as of filming, which is obviously earlier than what you're watching. We still don't know the exact details of what we're facing and what the plan is or anything like that. But we are incredibly grateful already for the prayers of God's people that are surrounding us and the messages of love and support. It's been amazing. How are we doing? Well, as you can imagine, we're in a mixture of emotions. We are scared, but we're also determined and resolved. We're frightened, and at the same time, we're trusting God. It's this whole mix of feelings. We feel very carried and upheld by our Heavenly Father, and yet there are still moments of deep struggle for us. And I'm imagining that's what the journey moving forward for us is going to feel like over the coming months. But as we face this major battle, the message of this Christmas series that we're embarking on together really resonates with me, which was why I talked to JD about going ahead and filming this sermon. I love the theme for this Christmas at Grace City. He gets us. He gets us. Because that's the message of Christmas. The message of Christmas is what theologians call the incarnation, that God became man, that Jesus stepped into our world as a full human being without sin, but experiencing everything, all the struggles that we go through and experience in life. And so today, for just a few minutes, I want to reflect with you on what it means that He gets us in our deepest struggles. He gets us in our deepest struggles. In the middle of the patchwork of stories in the Christmas narrative is a story that we pretty much ignore. It's a story that doesn't find its way into any of our Christmas carols. It's not included in any of the beautiful children's books that talk about the story of Christmas that we read to our young ones. It's hardly ever read in the Christmas readings of our church Christmas services. And that's because it's a story of death and darkness and wailing and pain and grief. Some scholars call it the slaughter of the innocents, the slaughter of the innocents. And the name itself suggests why this part of the Christmas story is hardly ever told. Because it's the story of the killing of the little boys of Bethlehem. But I want to go there today because I think this dark part of the Christmas story reminds us that Jesus gets us even in the darkest times in our lives. The story is found at the end of the story of the Magi or the wise men in Matthew's Gospel, chapter 2. So the story begins this way at the beginning of the chapter, Matthew 2 verses 1 and 2. Read, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi or wise men from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose, and we've come to worship him. Now, we know very little about these Magi, these wise men. They could have come from Babylon or Persia, maybe Arabia. We don't exactly know. We don't know if there was 3 of them or more. It's a plural word, so there was at least 2. That's about all we know. We don't know what the star was, whether it was a natural phenomenon that took place, which is what some scholars have tried to argue, or if it's a miraculous star or angel or something else that God used to guide them. But whatever it is, these mysterious figures have come to realize that this star signifies the birth of a king, a royal king over the house of Israel and the nation of Israel. So they come naturally to the city of Jerusalem, following the star from their land to the east. And so they come and they begin to ask in Jerusalem. Now, Jerusalem at this point, Judea, Israel, is ruled by a man by the name of King Herod. King Herod is one of the great tyrants, one of the great evil people of world history. He was a horrendous ruler. But he welcomes the Magi and he invites them in and he tries to bring them into his confidence. And when he finds out what their question is, where is the one who has been born King of the Jews, he asks his scholars, he asks the teachers of the law who know the ancient prophecies of the Old Testament about the prophecies of the birth of Messiah. And so he's told that Messiah is to be born in the little village, the hometown of Bethlehem. It's where King David had been born and raised as a shepherd boy, unknown to the rest of Israel. Now, Bethlehem then, and Bethlehem still in the time of King Herod, was not a large city. It was a small settlement, just a village really, with not too many people. But that's where Messiah, according to Scripture, was to be born. Particularly the prophet Micah, which is who they quote, the scholars quote, to King Herod. So having found that out, King Herod then calls the Magi back into his presence in verse 7. Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem, and he said, "Go and search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me, so that I too may go and worship him." Now that, of course, is not his intention, but that's what he tells the Magi. So the Magi leave Jerusalem. The star continues to guide them down the road to the village of Bethlehem, and there they find Jesus with Mary and Joseph. Now, in most of our retellings of the Christmas story, Jesus is a baby. Often it's still the same night he was born. The wise men, sometimes in some movies and some retellings and stories, the wise men turn up while the shepherds are still even there. But it's actually more likely that Jesus is not a newborn baby here. Because later on, of course, Herod is going to order the killing of every boy 2 years and younger. And that 2 years is based on him calculating when the Magi said they first saw the star. So it's possible that Jesus here is 1 or even 2 years old, maybe more of a toddler than a newborn baby. So maybe Jesus by now was beginning to walk a little bit and totter around a little bit. Maybe he was starting to gurgle and starting to make some first noises, try to shape some first words. So he's not a baby, he is an infant. And so the Magi find Jesus with Mary and Joseph, and they bring out these gifts that are so famous, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And they lay them out before this king, and it says in verse 12 or 11 that they worshipped him. Then in verse 12 it says, "And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they then returned to their country by another route." And this is where we then fade out from the story. We step away again, the Magi have left, and that's the end of their part in the story, and the camera fades. But that's actually not what happened in history. That's not what actually happened in these events. Instead, Matthew tells us this is what happened afterwards. Verse 16, "When Herod realized that he had been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious, and he gave orders to kill all of the boys of Bethlehem and its vicinity who were 2 years old and younger, in accordance with the time he had learned from the Magi." Goes on in verse 17, "Then what was said through the prophet Jeremiah was fulfilled." Quoting from Jeremiah 31, "A voice is heard in Ramah, weeping and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted, because they are no more." It's an incredibly sad part of the Christmas story, and it's no wonder that most of the time we just ignore it. Now again, Bethlehem was not a large settlement. It was a small village. And so scholars estimate that we're talking about maybe a dozen children, possibly 20, something around those numbers maximum. So it's not a huge number, but it's still a horrendous crime, isn't it? Imagining soldiers bursting into homes, wrenching little baby boys, newborn babies, toddlers out of their mothers' and fathers' arms and executing them. It is absolutely horrendous. And that is why Matthew here quotes from the prophet Jeremiah. Jeremiah 31 is talking about the wailing and the weeping that happened when the nation of Israel back in history had been taken off into captivity in the land of Babylon. And it seemed to Matthew a fitting verse to quote here to describe the anguish and the agony and the heartache and the pain and the grief of this moment in the Christmas story as these parents in Bethlehem had their children so cruelly torn from their arms and slaughtered before their eyes. Now, many critical scholars have pushed back on this story and said there's no record of this outside of Matthew's Gospel. Who would do this kind of thing? Well, actually, it completely fits the character of King Herod. He was a horrendous man, as I said earlier. In fact, the Jewish historian Josephus, who doesn't record this exact story but tells us a lot about Herod about a century later, he records that when Herod was on his deathbed, he ordered a mass slaughter of the leading citizens of Judea so that there would be grief at the time of his death. So Josephus writes these words. This is what Herod ordered. I know that the Jews, he says, will celebrate my death in a festival, but I can obtain by vicarious mourning and a magnificent funeral if you would consent to follow my instructions, giving these to his officials. You know these men here that I have put into custody. The moment I expire, have them surrounded by the soldiers and massacred so that all Judea and every household will weep for me whether they will or not, whether they want to or not. Now, those orders were never carried out in the end, but that's the kind of man Herod was. He did not mind slaughtering people left, right and centre if that would advance his agenda. He is known to have killed at least one of the women that he was married to. He executed 3 of his sons. In fact, a couple of centuries later, a Roman historian talking about Herod will get this story from Matthew 2 and the story of one of the killings of Herod's sons around the same time. He gets them accidentally confused, but here's what he wrote. When Augustus, the emperor, heard that Herod, the king of the Jews, had ordered all of the boys of Syria under the age of 2 years to be put to death, and that the king's son was among those killed, he said, I'd rather be Herod's pig than Herod's son. Now, he's got the details wrong. He's conflated 2 separate stories together. But what that shows us is that this is exactly Herod's characteristic. This is the kind of king he was. And so we can trust that the biblical narrative here and the historical basis of this. This really happened. And in the midst of the beautiful Christmas story that we celebrate every year, there is this horrendous story of these wonderful little boys being slaughtered in the streets of this village called Bethlehem. So why did Matthew put this in? Because I think it speaks to a really key part of this series that we're in this Christmas. He gets us. He gets us. You see, Jesus was born into a world of pain and tears. And that means he understands our pain and tears. Jesus was born into a world of pain and tears, so he understands the pain and the tears in our lives, even in the biggest struggles that we face. Now, of course, in this particular part of the story, Jesus escapes this. Jesus is not among the little boys who end up getting killed. And that's because back in verse 13 of Matthew 2, Matthew tells us this. When the Magi had gone, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream. Get up, he said, take the child and his mother and escape to Egypt. Stay there until I tell you, for Herod is going to search for the child to kill him. And so Joseph got up and he took the child and his mother during the night and left for Egypt. Egypt at this time, and particularly around the city of Alexandria, had a large Jewish population, and so they would have found a place to go. And because of the intervention of the angel, Jesus is spared this massacre that so deeply hurts these other families. Jesus is allowed to escape because it's not yet his time to be killed. But that means Jesus then becomes this political refugee. Jesus' family is being hunted by a brutal despot, a dictator. They become a displaced family who have to go on the run and can't go home. It's almost as though you're reading the headlines of what is happening in different parts of the world right now in this place. And it's a reminder to us, isn't it, that Jesus understands. He gets us. Jesus was born into a brutal, violent, painful, tear-stained world, the same world that you and I live in today. There's a beautiful prophecy in the book of Isaiah, Isaiah 53, most of which is speaking about the events surrounding the crucifixion of Jesus. But at one point, Isaiah writes this in Isaiah 53, verse 3. He was despised and rejected by mankind, a man of suffering and familiar with pain. And that's what I want us to understand this Christmas. He gets us. Jesus was born into a world of pain and tears, and so he understands our pain and our tears. He was familiar with pain. He was a man of suffering. So that's why we read in the Gospels that Jesus will weep. Jesus will be frustrated. Jesus will be hurt. Jesus will be betrayed by people he thought he could trust. Jesus will be rejected by so many. Jesus will be disappointed. Jesus will feel deeply alone. Jesus at times will feel overwhelmed with grief, particularly in the Garden of Gethsemane. Jesus will be beaten. Jesus will be scourged and whipped. And ultimately, Jesus will be crucified and will face death. And not just the physical pain, but the spiritual anguish of carrying our sin and the emotional toil that would have carried. You see, Jesus is not removed from the pain from our lives. Jesus was born into our world. That's what Christmas is all about. But it means he was born into a life of suffering. It means he experienced the pain that we experienced, that he has cried the tears that we cry. He gets us. He gets us. Many years ago, I came across a beautiful quote that I've used a number of times in this Christmas season, so those particularly at the East Campus may be familiar with these words. They were written by an Australian theologian many years ago by the name of Leon Morris. And here's what Dr. Morris wrote. Christmas does not show us a God who is serenely detached, but a God who is passionately involved. The incarnation speaks of God coming where we are, taking our nature upon himself, entering the world's struggle and winning our salvation. I've loved those words ever since I read them. That because of Christmas, because of the incarnation, because Jesus became fully a human being and experienced the lives that you and I experience, we come to a God in our prayers and in our tears and in our anguish, but we don't come to a God who is serenely detached like he has no clue. We come to a God who's passionately involved. We come to a God who gets us. Many of you will know that New York pastor Tim Keller is one of my favorite authors. And he's written a beautiful book on Christmas called Hidden Christmas. What many of you may not know is that Dr. Keller is right now in the middle of his own battle with cancer. And about 25 years ago, he faced a different battle. Back then, at around my age now, he faced a battle with thyroid cancer. Now he battles pancreatic cancer 25 years later, having won that first battle. So he knows exactly what I'm walking through right now. But here's what he writes about the coming of Jesus and the fact that Jesus gets us because of Christmas. Dr. Keller says Christmas shows you a God unlike the God of any other faith. Have you been betrayed? Have you been lonely? Have you been destitute? Have you faced death? Well, so has He. And it's just, again, this reminder that He gets us. That because Jesus was born into a world of pain and tears, He understands our pain and tears. And then Dr. Keller goes on. Christianity says God has been in all the places you have been. He has been in the darkness you're in now and more. And therefore, you can trust Him. You can rely on Him because He knows. And He has the power to comfort and strengthen and bring you through. I've got to tell you, I'm hanging on to those words. This Christmas, more than any other Christmas, those words mean an enormous amount to me. And my prayer is that they will mean an enormous amount to you if you are going through any trial or struggle this Christmas time. Jesus was born into a world of pain and tears, and so He understands our pain and tears. So whatever you are facing this Christmas, whatever you may face in life, He gets us. He understands. Whether you are facing a broken romance or a friendship that's ended, whether you're facing financial hardship that you have no idea how you're going to get around, whether you're facing the prospect of having to close your business down or potentially have to sell your house before the bank does, whether you've got an ongoing health struggle that you can't resolve, whether you're facing the death of a loved one or a battle with cancer, it doesn't matter. He gets us. And He gets us not in all of those big issues either. He gets us in all of the small struggles and difficulties and hardships of life. That's the wonder of Christmas. That's what makes Christmas so powerful. Not only that Jesus was born to die for our sins, but also to experience this world of pain and tears. And because He was born into this world of pain and tears, He understands the pain and the tears that we carry. So my friends, my prayer for all of you, and I've got to tell you, my prayer for me and my family, my wife and kids, and our wider whānau, is that we're going to hang on to that this Christmas. That we're going to know that we come to a God. We are shepherded by a shepherd through a dark valley who knows exactly what we're going through. He's not one who is serenely detached, but is passionately involved in every struggle of our lives. He gets us, folks. He really gets us.